So I wanted to do a video, try to do a quick one on population matters and why it matters. As far as the current political discourse in this country and the obligation, I think, of both leaders and educators to discuss this topic openly, because it is a part of global politics in today's age. And identity issues aside, there is an issue. So, what Population Matters is basically an organization of scientists that want to at least bring to the table the topic of population control um, for its direct implications on ecology. It's an unfortunate topic to bridge, and for the most part, I think it's been done professionally and empathetically towards the human condition for what it is, which is we are living sentient beings with inalienable individual rights that are separate and superior to the whole, as a matter of ethical and cultural choice. So that is a just the nature of what is, and so pretty much what it comes down to is if you acknowledge that we are on a finite planet, and on a unsustainable path, or ecologically, or environmentally, or as a function of habitat, with economics or any other metric being just an indicator of that objective um, reality, which is that the planet is changing and our ecosystems are changing, and they're changing because of us, or because of our lifestyles, because of our chemical influences on our environment, with the waste products that we produce largely as a society, although admittedly not exclusively. It's just the largest impact and the only one that we really have any control over. So what it comes down to is if you can accept that reality, you get to kind of a crossroads, and that crossroads is you either radically change your behavior and in some way compel the other sovereign individuals around you to simultaneously change their behavior through incentive, education. If it's in your self-interest, it will ultimately be in their self-interest if they have the same information available to them as you have to you, unless there's something wrong with you, which there could be something wrong with me, I don't know. But basically, what it comes down to is if you can accept the path we're on is unsustainable and that humans are the primary cause of that lack of sustainability, then you come to a crossroads. And that crossroads is you either need to reduce the population to the point where the ecosystem can support its impact without its impact overcoming the ability of its ecosystem, of the ecosystem, the environment, global, on average, to absorb that impact, or you change the behavior of the people. So people don't want to change their behavior. So what it comes down to is population control. So the ethical mechanism to control population is through the education and empowerment of women. The idea behind it is that basically men try to trap women. You know, you knock them up so they don't leave. And, if a woman has enough power, she's gonna not fall into that trap so willingly. Not that it's a trap, it's natural, it's whatever, but, there's a lot of that goes on, I think. Woman stays pregnant for 10 years, and, the guy gains some security, and the woman gains some security too. So the idea that these people have a codependency, and that codependency is cemented by reproduction, and that codependency is a survival imperative, perpetuates the cycle. So the idea is by creating like an artificial supplement for that codependency, which is, the government, that women won't feel the need to have a codependent relationship, and the cement, which is the child, is not there anymore. And then coupled with, birth control and stuff like that, the idea is that they can take a population that's maybe having 10 kids and drop it down to 3 kids, because this is what was witnessed when the West developed. It was less than 100 years ago when the average American family was having like 6 kids, and before that it was 9 kids, and they're still seeing that in Africa and some parts of India, and so they think that through education and economic development, that's going to follow suit. So that's good. The problem is that even with you get into several problems with population bubbles. So when you get to what would be considered like a top, like let's say, okay, a country like America, I personally believe every country is involved in some sort of depopulation, targeted to a demographic or systemic. It doesn't really matter. They are on some level trying to reduce their population with varying degrees of ethical tactics. Now, the number one kind of tactic I would say in reducing the population is feminism. But the number two is going to be like imprisonment and war and, taxation and oppression and all these things that kind of make the idea of having kids in this world unappealing. I don't really consider that stuff ethical, to be honest. I would rather see like flat out, education as to the reality, so that maybe I do think that the only way out of this is to eventually change the behavior, and that to be every man working for the function of preserving life, as opposed to ultimately working for a war machine. So a complete systemic change of our energy sector, of our agricultural sector, political, it's all based on oil and war. And, if you're going to have any sort of future and on above earth with living outside and all that stuff that we're used to, I think with a 20-year outlook, you're talking like, basically dedicating the resources that are currently dedicated towards war, dedicated towards environmental geoengineering, and by that, and I mean not just the resources, but I mean like the actual application of that value. So right now we are spending X amount of dollars on the military, who, for the, bless their hearts, do mostly drills. They are mostly driving their big tanks in circles and, setting targets of cardboard boxes and blowing them to smithereens, only to set up more cardboard boxes, drive in another circle, and shoot the shit out of those cardboard boxes. Now, while that might be a necessity in a violent and turbulent world, it's not necessarily the best allocation of human capital in a environmental disaster. So what, and I mean like on a macro scale, like that's our number one priority, is our military. It's what we dedicate, I would say, 80% of our excess value to is developing technology that is used exclusively or near exclusively by the military, and then training in that same regard. So if that same amount of energy was applied to, building um, vehicles that could harvest carbon out of the atmosphere. And instead of training men to bomb stuff, those men were actually running those pieces of equipment and actually removing carbon from the air. I think with that kind of equal effort, there could be a sustainable, um, ecologically sound, modern economy. But in the absence of that level of effort, I see depopulation and rewilding as the most likely solution. And unfortunately, it's probably the most likely one just because of the effort required. So this is where the whip comes in, because people are selfish, lazy, and short-sighted. And if, especially if the consequential of belief systems comes into play. So if you don't believe in heaven, if you don't believe in reincarnation, what's the point of having ethical plans that extend beyond your lifespan, or maybe your children's lifespan? There's no real upside to it. So when you have people in charge of making decisions and they don't believe that they're going to have to deal with the consequences of those decisions, they make decisions based on shorter time projections, because that's in the interest of their particular belief system. So what that leads to is basically like a suicide culture that has no real incentive for long-term planning. And that's what we live in today, largely. There are some leaders who believe that there is a God and a heaven, and that because of the harm they have caused through fraud and deception and breaking their oaths, that they'll be punished or rewarded, whatever they believe. And that does, manipulate their choice making algorithms. But I would say the vast majority of our leaders don't believe that they will face any consequences for the harm that their choices have caused of the future, because they'll be dead, and that's who they are. So when you have belief systems that are basically like, you know, there is no heaven, there is no hell, you get that sort of consequence. And then conversely, if you have people who believe that, it's our job to build heaven on earth, which is, not really a typical Judeo Christian belief system. It is definitely more, it's not in that kind of realm of normal American Christianity, I would say, who while they are guided ethically by a creator, and there are consequences that extend beyond their short lifespan, there's also ultimate forgiveness, so they can kind of get away with stuff by apologizing and avoid the consequences to those choices. So they kind of get out that way, in their minds. And I don't mean this because to imply that that's a reality. There are consequences. Even if you believe you're forgiven, you don't really escape the consequences, or at least the consequences are still present. You just might be psychologically disconnected from the guilt of those consequences. So then you get a very controlled population, because they can justify their behavior because they believe they'll be forgiven for their behavior, and ergo escape the consequences of their behavior. And then you have people who believe that, in reincarnation, and because of the behavior in a former life, future lives will suffer more. And so that it becomes their self-interest to basically try to make heaven on earth. And, through that, you get, the it's demonized in the West, because it's not like, oh, you want to live forever and you want to have like no pollution and no pain and no suffering. And there's going to be suffering, there's going to be pain, but it's like it it is kind of it requires those people to be in charge. It just does. And they are, and I mean specifically like the Chinese Shaolin monks, who they will discipline with appropriate measure, and through that discipline, there's an objective at the end of the discipline, and that's to achieve some degree of strength and health. And it's not punishment for the sense of domination. It's punishment for the purpose of forming a healthy individual. And there's a difference, but um, to have that kind of outlook on life and the consequence of that belief system, it builds a society that is sustainable, because generation upon generation, the belief system guides the choices, and the belief system is rooted in, I will have to face the consequences of these choices. And give it enough time and enough choices, you see that leads to either a suicidal culture or a sustainable, lasting, rock solid community that's existed for thousands of years. It's not a flash in the pan. It's not parasitic. It doesn't have to move from community to community, bleeding them dry in the process. And ultimately we are living in a global society, and we have global problems. And it's not the ego of the mind's eye that's gonna necessarily solve it, because that's always gonna be governed by like what's best for me. And my belief systems aren't perfect. I think that the population is probably intentionally being reduced. I don't think population matters is at the root of it. I think population matters attempted to bridge an extremely difficult topic, an extremely politically volatile topic that put people's lives in danger. And I believe that, selfish jerks who are just selfish jerks are just being selfish jerks, and they don't care about the environment. They don't care about social justice, and they don't care about my children. They don't care about me. They don't care about heaven. They don't care about the consequences of their choices. They're just selfish jerks. So what I would like to see is for a group like Population Matters to never need to exist, because every human being born is such an essential asset to the human struggle, which is to survive on this planet with as much happiness and as much conscious awareness as humanly possible for as long as possible. And that's the human struggle that we're engaged in. It's not a struggle to dominate fellow men for the purpose of reproducing, and to do so publicly to our absolute dominance. No, dude, you got a small role in a big world, and the more people you roll over, it's just going to hurt you in the long run. If there's no winning unless you're running in the right direction. If you're running in the wrong direction, dude, you could be the fastest guy on the planet. You're just going to get there first. I mean, I would like to see the direction of the global economy change rapidly. And I would like to see that done to avoid a cataclysmic global genocide that I see as an absolute result, consequential, the sum of the equation that is our global energy policy for my entire life. That's ecological disaster on a scale that is so far beyond unsustainable. It's like saying, is a bomb going off in your living room sustainable? It's absolutely not sustainable. It's the opposite of sustainable. It's death. And I just see the planet and the the exponential growth of carbon emissions as a bomb. There's a bomb just happening on a scale that we're not used to seeing. And I'd like to see that changed. And I think it's worthy of being the primary topic of conversation until such change happens. Because population does matter, the population needs to be informed so the behavior can change. So we can say we need more people instead of saying we need less.